Warning, the following program has been rated T for truth.
You can't handle the truth!
Oh, we think you can. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report with your host, truth warrior and mythbuster Kathleen Wells. The place where we distinguish fact from fiction, where data is used to drive points home, and where Kathleen takes the position that Democrats and black politicians have destroyed black America. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Now, your host, Kathleen Wells.
Welcome, Truth Warriors and Mythbusters. It's the Naked Truth Report. What's the good news? Driving into the station there was no traffic. That's the good news. What's the bad news? Well, let's see. It is now mandatory to wear a mask going into CVS or if you want to go pick up food at a restaurant. The bad news is Eric Garcetti, our mayor, said that Los Angeles will be definitely closed until May 15th, locked down until May 15th, at least. So our behavior, this is it. What we believe dictates our behavior, right? So if we believe that a mask will prevent us from getting or giving COVID-19 to others, we're okay with wearing a mask, right? But looking at the information, I think many of us believe a mask is meaningless to preclude other people from getting the virus or from us getting the virus ourselves, correct? Am I right? Anyway, yeah, like I said, the good news, no traffic. That's about the only good news. Did I say Happy Easter? I meant to say that. Happy Easter to my Truth Warriors. You know, I appreciate having so many listeners tune in to the Naked Truth Report. I'm very appreciative. And today is going to be a really good show. We're not going to talk about the coronavirus so much, although I've just touched on it. But I'm happy to welcome on the show my guest, a pop history author who is going to talk to us about who you guys know who my favorite president is, right? And you know why. My favorite president is Lincoln. Why? Because of that, a 700-word speech, his second inaugural speech. Democrats and liberals, academicians, historians have been rewriting is that the word I want to use? They have they've rewritten history. They've rewritten history. And that rewriting of history has been detrimental to black Americans because Abraham Lincoln has said in his speech his second inaugural speech that the Civil War was fought specifically, he explicitly stated this in a speech, that the Civil War was fought to end slavery. Yet Democrats, liberals consistently say that's not true. In fact, they say that Lincoln was racist and he didn't care about slavery and blah, 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 all that negative stuff. But anyway, I want to get right to my guest because I want to hear what he has to say. He is a pop history author, award-winning pop history author, and his latest book is What Really Happened, the Assassination of Lincoln. We're going to talk about that. So welcome to the Naked Truth Report, Robert Hutchinson.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for having me on. And happy Easter to you.
Yes, happy Easter to you. So tell me, what is a pop history author exactly?
That means I read 1,000-page books, so you don't have to. In other words, what I do is I research subjects that are, very involved and very complicated, and I try and distill it down to the essence and write in a one-volume, easy-to-read book for everybody and try and separate the facts from just the speculations and the scholarly controversies. Because with every issue, everybody debates every single little thing, and there's, 1,000-page books on one side and 1,000-page books on the other, and it's kind of hard to know what's what. And so my job is to sift through all that and explain things very simply, and what I believe is the best judgment of mainstream historians on an issue.
So you are a historian?
I am a nonfiction writer that works with historians.
Okay. So, and you say pop history because you take on popular subjects, is that? Why you put the pop on?
I write for the general public. I don't write for scholarly audiences or for academicians. I write for ordinary people. You know, kind of like the Bill O'Reilly approach to writing books that ordinary people would read. And the problem with the assassination of Lincoln is they are 1,000-page books, and they take a controversial point of view, or they want to take an unproven point of view and run with that to kind of make a name for themselves or whatever. And so I try to stick with what we actually know, the facts that everybody agrees on, and tell the story that way. And I go back to the original sources. I look at the testimonies in court, the letters from people that were actually there, and I retell the story as best I can in an easy-to-read way.
And why did you take on the subject of Lincoln?
Okay, that's a very good question. Well, I had pitched a series of books to Regnery called the What Really Happened series, and the whole idea was that we were going to go back to the most important events in history and take a fresh look at them and tell people what really happened as opposed to the myths and so on. And we were kind of debating, there's all sorts of things you could do, the Titanic, the killing of JFK, 9/11, and we have all those on our list, but I wanted to go back to something, Lincoln. I've always been a huge fan of Lincoln, and also there's so much about the Lincoln assassination that's relevant to today. People don't realize that Lincoln was despised by at least half the country. I mean, literally, people talk about polarized politics today. The things they wrote about Lincoln, you just wouldn't even believe. We consider him this great man, the Lincoln Monument and so on. But back in his era, he was denounced by at least half the population. And the political divides among people, I mean, they were literally fighting a civil war, and yet in many places like Washington, D.C., people had to live together. They had to work with people. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that. The Confederate sympathizing citizens would work in the same business with Union-supporting citizens, and it's just like today. They had to kind of bite their tongues or they would get in fistfights. So it's a very relevant, I think, to today's age, and people deserve to know more about it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, was he hated as much as Trump?
I think he was hated far more.
Oh, yeah?
Obviously, the Confederacy hated him, but he had a lot of enemies in the North. People don't realize that. There were Democrats in the North who also despised Lincoln, and because he was sending hundreds of thousands of young people off to die in a war that people weren't sure they wanted to fight. Mm-hmm. So it was a very controversial thing what he was doing. He suspended a lot of civil liberties. I mean, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Judges and newspaper editors who criticized him, he threw some of them in jail, or at least his government did. So he did a lot of things that were very controversial, and he was a very controversial figure back then. And now he's considered probably, if not the greatest, one of the greatest presidents in American history. But in his time, he was very controversial. So I was very attracted to that, and just the whole milieu of the time where the Democrats and Republicans were fighting back then just as much. People don't realize that. This has been a 150-year-old argument.
Yeah, April 14th marks the 155th year since his assassination. He suspended the habeas corpus, but he wasn't impeached for it. But I guess one could say he was actually assassinated for it. I mean, that sounds kind of like in bad taste, but, he wasn't impeached for suspending habeas corpus, right?
Yes, he wasn't. But it was in the middle of the Civil War, and I'm not a lawyer, and apparently he had good constitutional reasons for doing it. He was a lawyer, but he was a controversial figure, there's no doubt about it. As I said, it wasn't a particularly popular war to go down and kill your cousins, in another state, one state away, and yet he saw it through, and his goal was, as you said in your introduction, to free the slaves and to save the United States.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, at least 600,000 American soldiers died in the Civil War, correct?
Yeah, we forget that. Yes, right. But, I don't know the exact numbers for each side, but altogether it was actually more like 630,000 American soldiers died. It by far the largest loss of life in any of our wars. We only lost, I believe, 350,000 in World War II. So it was our deadliest war by far. And the whole story of how John Wilkes Booth decided to kill Lincoln is part of that, and we can get into that in a second. But
so go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No. Well, the whole thing was the Confederacy was losing the war. It was almost over. Lincoln died a happy man. The April 14th, 1865 was probably the happiest day of Lincoln's life since the war began. People don't realize that. He had fulfilled his life purpose. Just 5 or 6 days earlier, Lee surrendered in the last major battle of the war, and everybody knew the war was over. Jefferson Davis was still at large, or maybe 90,000 Confederate troops still in the field, but the war was over as far as everybody knew. And the entire city of Washington, D.C. was celebrating. Tens of thousands of people were in the city. There were wild parties. There were drunken people on the streets. And Lincoln was beginning to think of a life outside of the presidency. He was thinking of maybe going to California. He even told his wife when he drove around the city that day that he'd like to maybe go to Palestine and see Jerusalem. And he was starting to dream of the life after. And so he saw his purpose fulfilled. And even though he didn't see it coming, he was probably the happiest he'd been in years. And then he was killed. So,
yeah, and one of the main theme of your book is everyone thinks they know what happened at Lincoln's assassination, and you ask, but do they really know? So, what is different from what we know or believe, rather?
Well, a lot of people don't know the backstory, that actually what John Wilkes Booth was trying to do was to kidnap Lincoln. Lincoln used to go off and ride around sort of on his own a little bit, ride a horse to soldiers' homes. That was kind of the summer White House. And so they hatched this plan, he and about 24 Confederate sympathizers, that they would kidnap Lincoln. They would waylay him on one of his nightly rides, put him in a buggy, get him across the Potomac in a boat, and take him down to Richmond, Virginia, and hold him hostage to free Confederate soldiers that were in Union prisoner of war camps, and thereby giving the South or the Confederacy a shot at regrouping and surviving. That was his original plan. But by the time they had a lot of delays, he was absolutely inept. He didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't a trained spy or didn't have any really military training at all, except for one time when he served with the Richmond Grays when he saw John Brown executed. But he had no real training. He was completely inept. And by the time they finally got around to trying this, the war was almost over. There was no point. There wasn't going to be any prisoner exchanges. And that's what a lot of his co-conspirators realized, that he might have something else on his mind. And they all backed out because they didn't want any part of murder. They had futures, they had families, they didn't want anything to do with that. So Booth was left with just 3 very poor, desperate men that he was paying to be his henchmen. And his plan changed the last couple of days, and that he got the idea that if they all acted at once, they could kill Lincoln, the vice president, and the Secretary of State. And as an added bonus, they found out late in the day that maybe General Grant, the chief general of the Union Army, might be at the theater as well. They could kill him as well. In one fell swoop, they could basically knock out the entire leadership of the U.S. government. And maybe that would give the South or the Confederacy a chance to fight another day. And that was his actual plan. And it as crazy as it sounded, it just might have worked, at least for a time. But he ultimately only succeeded in killing Lincoln. He wasn't able to kill any of the other people because all of his henchmen backed out and didn't do what they were supposed to do.
And so were they all Confederate sympathizers? Where was John Wilkes Booth from exactly?
That's the weirdest thing about him.
Yeah.
He's one of these guys that, first of all, he came from a family, a pro-union, abolitionist family from the North. They're from Maryland, which was a border state, but they were all they were actors on the stage in New York City. They voted for Lincoln. They were all pro-union and anti-slavery. And yet he was this little odd duck in his family that he took the contrarian point of view. He sided with the South because he spent a couple of years in the South when he was a young man as an actor and was treated nicely by the Southern audiences. So he gradually became sympathetic to the Southern cause. But and the odd thing about him is all of his friends thought he was one of the nicest guys. They sung his praises even after he was the most hated man in America. They said he was the kindest, most generous man they've ever met. And it was a very, very odd thing. But he was also a political fanatic and very stubborn, and he would let politics crowd out common sense. And that's obviously what he did.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it sounds like he had Lincoln derangement syndrome.
A little bit. He did have Lincoln derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
He absolutely did.
If he would go to the lengths of killing him. So how did he have access to the booth where Lincoln was sitting? Yeah.
Yes, that's a good question. Obviously, it was a different era. Anybody back then could go see Lincoln if they were willing to go on a Friday and plead their case. There was an actress who was from. People don't realize how porous the border was. I mean, there was an actress from the South whose little brother was caught as a courier and was going to be executed as a spy, and she traveled north. She crossed the border, or the lines, and went to Washington D.C., waited her turn to see Lincoln, and begged Lincoln for the life of her little brother. And Lincoln, as he almost always did, spared the boy and said, it makes no sense to me to execute a teenage boy for being a courier. So she became a fanatic Lincoln fan from that time on, even though she was from Mississippi or somewhere. She was on the stage and nodded hello to Booth the night of the assassination. She recognized Booth. She knew who he was. She was on the stage as an actress, and she saw him, and she said, "Oh, what's he doing up there?" And she kind of nodded hello, and he nodded back. And then he went in and shot Lincoln. So it was an odd little world. But anyway, at that time, anybody could see the president. He didn't have as much guards as they did now, but he did have a police bodyguard that night who was off in the saloon. And there was a guy named Charles Forbes, who was Lincoln's personal assistant, we'd call him today, who was sitting outside the corridor that led to the presidential box. And Booth came up to him, and the guy stopped him and said, "This is the president's booth, sir. You can't come in." And Booth just simply handed him a business card and said, "I need to speak to the president." And he said, "Okay," and let him in. Because two other messengers had come within the previous hour, and so he assumed that the Booth had a legitimate reason to talk to Lincoln and let him in. And he went in, and he put a piece of wood up against the door so it couldn't be opened. And he snuck in, and with his Derringer, he put the Derringer 6 inches behind Lincoln's head, very quietly snuck in and pulled the trigger.
Well, how do you think events would have unfolded if Lincoln wasn't assassinated?
Nobody can say that. That's always. But one thing is for sure: Lincoln wanted to grant broad amnesty to the Confederacy. He basically told the soldiers that if they put down their weapons, they could take their horses and go back home to their families at the time of the spring plantings. They would not be charged with treason. They could just go back to their lives. And that was his plan. He wanted to have a national reconciliation, and they weren't quite sure what they were going to do with the leaders of the Confederacy, if they were going to try them or not, but he was adamant that he did not want anybody executed. He just wanted to put this behind us. His vice president, Andrew Johnson, did not like the Confederacy, even though he's from the South. He hated the Confederacy. He was anti-black, and he did not follow through on a lot of what Lincoln wanted to do. He blocked a lot of Lincoln's plans. So it took about 75 years to do what Lincoln thought would be able to be done in 10 or 20 years. So it basically prolonged the Civil War perhaps by 50 years, or made it a national reconciliation much longer coming.
Mm-hmm. So you asked the question, how did Booth evade being captured for 2 weeks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the funnest parts of the story. He leaped on, he was up in the presidential box, which was above the stage, and it was a good distance. It was maybe 15 feet. So after he shot after he shot Lincoln, there was a major in the box with his guest, Lincoln's guest, with his fiancée, and the guy jumps up and grabs Booth, and Booth had a knife and slashed the guy's arm, and Booth was much stronger than the major anyway, and threw him off, and then leaped from this box onto the stage, and he broke his leg. He a real sharp break, but he was still able to walk, sort of, and he hobbles off the stage and escapes. He escapes out the back, and then he goes, as everybody knows the story, he goes to Dr. Mudd, and they fix his leg that night, and Dr. Mudd sent him to a Confederate smuggler by the name of Thomas Jones, and this guy agreed to help Booth because he was sympathized with the Confederacy, or he was a Confederate supporter, and with no charge, even though he could have gotten a $50,000 reward if he turned him in, and might be executed if he did help him, but he agreed to help him. And he said, "There's no way you can get out of here. They're searching every farmhouse, every barn, every road for 100 miles around Washington. There's no way you can escape. Your only chance is to hide in plain sight, lie down in this thicket of woods, lie on the cold, wet ground, do not make a fire, and don't make a sound. And I will bring you food every day and newspapers," because Booth wanted to read his reviews, being an actor. Mm-hmm. He wanted to know what everybody said. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what they did. And as a result, he lay down on the ground, miserable and wet, for 5 nights, and they brought him food every day. And then there was a report that Booth had been seen in Virginia, across the Potomac, and just as Thomas Jones predicted, they all left. They said, he got away, he's off in Virginia. So they left. All the soldiers left, and then Booth was able to try and sneak across the Potomac in a rowboat. And the way he got caught was that report was actually wrong. Nobody had seen Booth there, but it put some detectives on the scent, and they went to that place, and by sheer coincidence, that's where Booth was headed. So the detectives were able to catch Booth because of a false report that he was in this part of Virginia, and by sheer coincidence, Booth went there, right into the arms, basically, of this posse that was looking for him. It was sheer chance that he was caught.
I find history so fascinating. And as I said, our behavior, what we believe dictates our behavior. Right?
Yeah, it's a fascinating time in history. I was never really into the Civil War myself. I took maybe one class in high school or so on. I'm actually specialized in early Christianity, but I dug into all of this, and it's as you say, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Everybody should download them and listen to them on, books on tape kind of thing, because it is as relevant as today as it was back then. And we're having the same arguments. How do we settle things? Human rights versus majority rule, and so on. And Lincoln and Douglas had these debates. It's just a fascinating period of our history, and people should know it.
Okay, we're speaking with pop history author, award-winning pop history author. What are some of your other books?
I just finished one on Hitler, the death of Hitler. It's what really happened, the death of Hitler. I've done a bunch of books on early Christianity. One's called The Dawn of Christianity, about how early Christianity started. And another book on the historical Jesus, what was Jesus Christ really trying to achieve. And kind of, I don't know if you know about that, but a lot of people are attacking Christianity, that Jesus was really a revolutionary who was trying to overthrow the Romans and so on. Reza Aslan wrote a book called Zealot about that, and I tried to debunk all that. So you gotta send me all your books. They sound so fascinating. You think I'm kidding. Anyway, my guest is award-winning pop history author, Robert Hutchinson. His book is What Really Happened, The Lincoln Assassination. We're going to take a break, and how do you feel about taking phone calls, Robert? Sure, anytime.
Okay, we'll open up the phone lines. If you have a question for Robert Hutchinson regarding the Lincoln assassination, give a call. We'll be right back.
Heroes proved.
Welcome back, Truth Warriors and Mythbusters. My guest, Robert Hutchinson, who is a award-winning pop history author. His book that we're talking about today is what really happened. What is it? What really happened? The Lincoln assassination. And in fact, I was just going over a section in your book, and you say the pro-slavery Democrats were accusing the abolitionist Republicans that they were pro-interracial marriage. There was it was called fake news.
Yes, he did not invent fake news. That is actually an incredible story that two Democrat supporting New York reporters got the idea of writing a pamphlet, which they called miscegenation, which was a new word that when people of different races or different colors got married, they used to call it amalgamation. But they made up this fake scientific word, and they said that this was the Republicans' plan, was to force poor whites to marry all the black slaves that were released, and they were going to create a super race of Americans who were going to be a blend of blacks and whites. And of course, this fed into the racism that existed at the time, that the white population was going to be forced to marry the black slaves and so on. And the Republicans didn't have any such plans. They thought marriage was a private matter between people, and that was that. But then the reporters, they published this fake pamphlet, and they actually sold it. And then they wrote about it in their newspaper, and then Democrat politicians waved it on the floor of Congress. And then the Telegraph, which was the internet of the day, spread this story that Abraham Lincoln had this plan. And it was all fake news, and Lincoln just ignored the whole thing. He was smart enough to see that it was a setup, and he just didn't even comment on it. He thought it was just ridiculous. But it was a deliberate attempt to prevent him from being reelected. This would happen in 1864. So it was flat out hoax. It was a flat out newspaper hoax.
Fake news. And one of the journalists worked for the New York World. The irony, right?
Yes.
As we have the New York Times. Yeah, our New York Times today does fake news, right? At least us Republicans would say that. Us Trump supporters, I should say.
Yes. Well, it's not a new thing. Let's put it that way. And people were doing it. Politics has been pretty dirty from the beginning. It's not something we invented.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know history so that they can put things in proper context. A lot of us we don't know history, or we know a revised version of history. We don't know the true and accurate version of history, which you can get from looking at historical documents, actually reading the pamphlet to get an impression exactly of what was going on. We're not properly educated, and this failure to be properly educated and to know history is destroying American culture. That's the position I take.
Well, that's why I have a job, is because I try to introduce people to this stuff, because people don't have the time to go back. But one of the fun aspects of my job is to go back and read these things. I never read Frederick Douglass's autobiography. It's incredibly interesting, his whole life. And there's all these other people that were writing that time. One of Mary Todd Lincoln's best friends was a former slave who worked as a seamstress in the White House, and she wrote one of the best accounts of what life was like. Her name was Elizabeth Keckley, and she wrote one of the best accounts of what life was like in the Lincoln White House. In fact, she wrote about Lincoln's son, Willie. One of the things people don't realize is they had an epidemic when Lincoln first came into the White House. Right after he was elected, there was a typhoid fever epidemic that swept Washington, D.C., and it killed his son, Willie, who was 11 years old. And Lincoln was he spent weeks sobbing over the loss of his little boy. And Mary Todd Lincoln, his wife, was so distraught she couldn't get out of her bed for 3 weeks, didn't even attend his funeral. So they were living through a lot of the same stuff we are, including an epidemic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is also fascinating. I love history. Why don't we take a call now from Brett in L.A. Hi, Brett. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Hello. Blessed Easter, Kathleen and Dr. Hutchinson.
Thank you.
Yes,
Not a doctor, but
oh, just my friend.
just a mister. Yes.
Yeah, what I was thinking about, since we're speaking about President Lincoln at this time, is what would he have to say about today's secessionist Confederate state of California re-enslaving its blacks by divesting them of their God-given constitutional rights on Easter and Passover?
That's a very good question. Lincoln was not a conventional Christian by any means, but he was a Bible reader and he believed in God. And I'm not sure what he would say if you're talking about not being able to go to church and so on. I don't think it would have even occurred to him to try and have a law passed that would affect the whole country. It just was they had a different mentality back then that's not even close to ours. I mean, it was controversial, some of the things he did that we would think is no big deal, but even back then, for the federal government to take the measures that it did was just considered a big abuse of power. So,
yeah. Because in effect, what I'm considering, it isn't just blacks that are being re-enslaved. The whole damn country is being every rule book is being thrown away, and I'm especially amazed that the black leadership is the so-called, what I call the black slave owners, Louis Farrakhan, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Barack Obama. All of them are promoting this progressive slavery. It's unacceptable.
Well, no, I mean, Malcolm X wrote about that and spoke about that black misleadership, black politicians don't have the interest of black Americans, never did. Mm-hmm. They didn't during Malcolm X time. Maybe Booker T. Washington did, but Booker T. Washington wasn't a politician. But the politicians, I was just blocked from Facebook again, because I'm always blocked on Facebook for 30 days for calling John Lewis a coon. Well, the only reason why I called him a coon is because the black Democrats call black Trump supporters coon. So I called John Lewis a coon, and they blocked me for 30 days.
Yeah. I had another thought. You brought up Frederick Douglass, and he was once asked, what should America do about the black problem? And he said, you don't do anything. Leave us alone. Let us stand or fall on our own. And every time they try to help, it's just destructive.
Well, he's a very interesting character. He was a staunch Republican, actually. I mean, for the obvious reason is that the Republicans were founded as an anti-slavery party, mm-hmm. and the Democrats were for years afterwards a pro-slavery party. So it is kind of a mystery to me how so many African Americans are support the Democrats given the history. I mean, I understand things changed, and they're free to take any position they want. I'm trying to be apolitical in my book. I'm trying not to take sides, mm-hmm. but still, it's just there's no doubt about it that the Republican Party was founded as an anti-slavery abolitionist party.
Well, most blacks believe in the Southern strategy, which is a myth, I believe, from what I've learned. But they believe that they switched parties during the Civil Rights era. Most blacks believe that.
Right. I understand that. Yeah. And I'm sure people believe that in good faith and so on. And
right.
And so I'm not going to try and get political on that. But just in terms of the history, when you listen to the Stephen Douglas debates with Lincoln, you really hear the same kind of fighting. Basically, the Republicans were saying, we don't care what the Constitution says. This is a matter of human rights.
Oh.
And you simply do not have the right to do this. And, the Democrats try to say it's legal.
Right.
Hey, it's legal.
Yeah, I would like to get you can get that on audio? The Lincoln...
I was just listening to it this weekend. The Democrats' argument was slavery was constitutional. And the U.S. Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision just a couple years earlier affirmed that. They said, absolutely, it's constitutional. And the Republicans said, we don't care. It's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And William Seward, whose house was on the Underground Railroad and was a famous, fiery abolitionist and became Lincoln's Secretary of State, he said that the nation has to answer to a higher law. And even if slavery was constitutional, which he didn't think it was, but even if it was, it still had to be abolished because it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Republicans took that point of view. And to me, it resonates with the whole abortion issue, but I won't get into that.
Right.
But the Democrats are using the same arguments back then that they use for abortion today. They were saying, if you don't like slavery, then don't own slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have a right to impose your northern morality on us. Mm-hmm. That's their argument. And that's the same argument they use for abortion today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, why don't we take a call now from Pamela? What I would like to do is play those. I'm going to play that debate between Lincoln and who was the other guy you said?
Stephen Douglas. But
Stephen Douglas.
They're hours long. Back in those days, the debates went for 3 hours, and they had 7 of them.
Oh, well, I'll get excerpts.
You'd have to get excerpts. Trust me.
Right. Okay, let's take a call now from Pamela in Culver City. Hi, Pamela. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Hi, Kathleen Wells, and hi, Mr. Hutchinson. I have a question from Mr. Hutchinson. There
Sure.
are several groups. There are several groups today that don't believe that President Lincoln fought the Civil War to free the slaves, and I want to know why is that?
Well, it's complicated. I don't want to contradict Kathleen Wells, but on this issue, Lincoln was an abolitionist. There's no doubt about it. If you listen to he was, everybody knew he was an abolitionist. Everybody accused him of being an abolitionist. He hated slavery. He spoke about it. But it is true that Lincoln's major mission, as he saw it, was to save the United States. He thought that slavery would die out of its own evilness if it was not extended into the Western territories, into the new states. The reason the Civil War issue came up was because America was going west. And so the big issue, they had worked out a compromise that the South could keep slavery in the states where it was legal, but it could not go anyplace else. They could not bring slaves out west because they thought that slavery would gradually die out, and that would be that. And Lincoln kind of had that attitude. He did not want it to go anywhere beyond where it was then, and he thought it would slowly die out. And so his mission was to preserve the Union, and people will point at that out when they say he didn't care about slavery. He did care about slavery a lot, but his main mission was to save the Union. Now, what's interesting is the Southern states, when they explain their reasons for going to war, or the reasons for forming the Confederacy, I should say, they do cite slavery as the reason why they were going to form a new country, because they were determined to keep it. The Democrat Party was determined to keep slavery in the Southern states. That is true, and those documents are online.
Yeah, well, in his second inaugural speech, he's explicit, which I've read. He explicitly says the Civil War was fought to end slavery. There's a sentence in there that says explicitly that. By that time, and he did the Emancipation Proclamation and all that. That was later. By the end of the war, that was his position. But when he started the war, his goal was to preserve the country and stop slavery from going out west. And then he thought it would gradually come to an end. Probably not fast enough for slaves, but that was his way he looked at it. And there's a famous text where he said that if he could save the country by abolishing slavery, he would do that. If he could save the country by keeping slavery, he would do that. If he could save the country by partially abolishing slavery, he would do that. In other words, as far as he was concerned, his mission was to save the United States, to preserve the country as it was, to preserve democratic government. And his secondary mission, which he also had, was to get rid of slavery. So it's a complicated thing. I hope I didn't make it more complicated. Okay, Pamela, is that
the
it?
Reason that?
Go ahead.
Is that the reason?
Yeah, go ahead.
The groups today that said that President Lincoln did not fight the war to free slaves, are they using the same reason that you just gave me?
How can we know what other people think?
Well, we have his writings and stuff.
No, but I mean, how do we know what these other groups are thinking? I think that they're just making something up. They don't know necessarily, do
there
they?
Are people that hate Lincoln, though. There's a lot of people that hate Lincoln still today. I mean, there's people that say he was a tyrant. and he killed 600,000 people.
Right.
And
Black Americans must remember that at least, we know that 300,000. Well, we know a lot, numbering in the six figures, died. American soldiers, white American soldiers, died in slavery. They were part of exactly, and we have no understanding of that. People gave their life.
A lot of black soldiers. There was a lot of black soldiers too that fought for the Union, and I don't know the figures how many died, but there were quite a few black soldiers that fought on the side of the Union. So there's no doubt if you read the documents of that time, this was the moral issue of the time. People were totally aghast at slavery, especially in the North. And there was just no way of settling it. You couldn't have one group of the country saying it was perfectly fine, like John Wilkes Booth said, and another group thinking it was a moral abomination. And it kind of eventually was going to come to a head one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Pamela, thank you for calling the Naked Truth Report. That issue is still living. They hang. Too many Black Americans and Democrats hang on this slavery issue, conjoined with racism, as a reason to keep Black Americans with the Democratic Party. I know you don't want to be political, but
Yeah, it's really to try and say, because the embarrassment that the Democratic Party was historically the slavery party, so they want to downplay Lincoln's commitment to ending slavery, and he was an abolitionist. When you listen to those Stephen Douglas debates with him, you can tell that's what he was fighting for was. And that's why, as soon as he was elected president, that's when they decided to secede from the Union, because they figured that was it. Lincoln was an abolitionist, and he was going to do away with slavery, and that's why they decided to do it as soon as he was elected. So I understand why they're doing it.
So the onus is on Black Americans to get educated so you can stop whining about it, okay? Because that was like over 100 years ago, and we're still reliving it like it was yesterday. That's the way we're manipulated about most Black Americans who are voting Democrat. We're manipulated, hanging on to slavery like it was yesterday. It was over 150 years ago, and Lincoln was an abolitionist. Get educated. Read. You can read the documents yourself. Listen to the debates. I'm going to start playing excerpts of the debates between Lincoln and Douglas, so that we must be. The onus is on Black Americans to get themselves educated and informed about what's what. Stop guessing and letting liberals tell you what's what. Find out for yourself.
I will not tell Black Americans what they should do about that, but I do think they would. They do think they would find it interesting if they went back and read some of those things at that time.
Oh, they'd be so enlightened.
Yeah, it was a fierce battle. It really was.
Yeah, I love history, and it's so thrilling to have you on as a guest. I'm going to have you on again because I love the way you talk about this stuff with such passion, and the fact that you've written about Christ and Hitler, both controversial issues. I love taking on controversial issues, so I'm going to have you on again, Robert.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
my Hitler book will be out in August, so.
It's a Hitler book. What is I've got 2 minutes.
The death of Hitler. It's a lot of people say Hitler, escaped to Argentina.
Yeah.
And the History Channel, for 3 years, the History Channel just recently had a reality TV series about that. And I look at what really happened, the death of Hitler. Did he escape or didn't he? Why do people say he did? And I look at all the evidence behind that and tell you what actually happened. And we didn't actually have final, definitive, scientific proof about what really happened until 2018, believe it or not.
Oh, via DNA evidence or something?
Yes.
Oh, really?
DNA evidence.
Oh, yeah, see, I'm a good guesser, right?
Yeah,
anyway,
that's right.
Yeah, well, send me your Lincoln book, please. I'd love to read it. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to read it. And I really appreciate you being on as a guest. We didn't spend so much time. We didn't talk about coronavirus, COVID-19, which I'm glad. We needed a break from it, right?
Yes, we all need a break from it.
because I think it's too much. And Los Angeles our mayor is very draconian. And also the governor. So there's my music. Yeah, the governor is gruesome. That's what they say on another show. I think the guy that comes after me calls him Governor Gruesome. There's my music. Governor Gruesome, yeah. And Garcetti, I have to come up with a name for him too. But anyway, my guest was Robert Hutchinson. The book is What Really Happened, The Lincoln Assassination. Go out and get it. Can they get it on Amazon?
Absolutely. It's there now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Robert. You'll be back on again. I appreciate it. Thank you, Truth Warriors and Mythbusters. Happy Easter. Be careful. Wash your hands. Be healthy. And I love you guys. And next week, I think we're going to talk about communism versus capitalism again. We had that once. We're going to have it again. Thanks. Bye.